I woke up in a private hospital room in Atlanta after suddenly collapsing during my own anniversary dinner. My vision was swimming in a gray haze, but my hearing was razor sharp. Behind the half-open door of my suite, I heard my mother-in-law Geraldine whispering in a frantic, hushed tone. "Are you sure she took the entire dose?" she asked. My sister-in-law Chloe let out a quiet, entitled laugh that I had grown to despise over the years. "Relax," Geraldine Chloe said smoothly. "By tomorrow morning, everything she built will be ours." My blood ran completely cold. I carefully slid my trembling hand under the heavy hospital blanket, grabbed my phone, and texted my corporate attorney Roxanne. "Execute the plan, now." My name is Zuri. I am 35 years old and the founder of a highly successful financial technology firm. Until yesterday, I thought I had built a beautiful life and a perfect marriage. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart people who mistook your generosity for stupidity. The sterile smell of bleach and rubbing alcohol grounded me in reality as the heavy fog in my brain began to lift. I remembered standing in my own dining room, lifting a glass of expensive red wine and looking across the table at my husband Tarek. I remembered the loving smile on his face right before the room started spinning violently out of control. Now lying in this hospital bed with an IV drip in my arm, the puzzle pieces were violently snapping together. Outside my door, the conspiratorial conversation continued. Chloe sighed loudly, her voice dripping with the kind of casual arrogance that only comes from generational wealth. "I do not understand why this is taking so long," she complained. "My father's lawyers are already on standby to start the asset transfer. We just need her signature so Tarek can take control of the board." Geraldine shushed her quickly. "Keep your voice down, Chloe. The doctors gave her enough muscle relaxers to knock out a horse, but we cannot be careless. We just need to get the paperwork signed while she is disoriented. Once Tarek has the power of attorney, we can finally stop pretending. I am so tired of watching her walk around that Buckhead estate like she is better than us just because she coded some finance app." Listening to Geraldine, an African-American woman who had always claimed to view me as a daughter, conspire with Chloe. A wealthy white woman who had married my husband's brother made my stomach physically turn. Chloe had never liked me. She came from a family of old-money real estate developers and constantly made subtle, passive-aggressive comments about how I worked too hard, how my relentless drive was so exhausting, and how I still carried the desperate energy of someone trying to escape poverty. Geraldine, instead of defending her own kind, constantly sought Chloe's approval. My mother-in-law worshipped Chloe's family wealth while deeply resenting my self-made success. I had pulled myself up from nothing to build a multi-million-dollar empire. But to Geraldine, I would always be the girl who did not come from the right background. I did not cry. Crying was a luxury I could not afford right now. The betrayal burned through my chest, but that intense heat also burned away the lingering effects of whatever drug they had slipped into my drink. I kept my breathing slow, and even as I heard the heavy wooden door creak open, I let my eyes drift half shut perfectly, mimicking the exhausted, incapacitated state they expected to find me in. Geraldine walked in first, her face instantly dropping into a mask of exaggerated, sickeningly sweet concern. Chloe followed close behind, lingering near the foot of the bed with her arms crossed, looking entirely out of place in a hospital room with her designer handbag and perfect blowout. "Zuri, baby," Geraldine cooed, her voice softening into a fake maternal pitch that made my skin crawl. "You gave us such a terrible scare last night. The doctors say you suffered a severe exhaustion collapse. You have just been working yourself too hard at that company of yours. We have been so worried." I let out a weak, raspy breath, playing my part to perfection. "What happened to me?" I whispered, letting my head roll slightly to the side as if lifting it required too much effort. "You just need to rest, sweetheart," Geraldine said, stepping closer to the bed. She pulled a polished wooden clipboard from behind her back and laid it gently on my chest. "But before you go back to sleep, the hospital administration needs a quick signature. It is just a standard medical proxy. It allows Tarek to handle your hospital bills and deal with your insurance while you recover so you do not have to stress about a single thing. She pressed a heavy silver pen into my right hand. Her fingers were cold against my skin. My vision was still slightly blurred, but I forced my eyes to focus on the document attached to the clipboard. The bold black letters at the very top of the page were unmistakable. It did not say medical proxy. It read durable power of attorney and asset assignment. My eyes scanned the dense legal text below the header. It was a masterfully drafted document, clearly prepared by expensive corporate lawyers. It granted Tarek full, unrestricted access to my holding company, complete voting rights on my board of directors, and the absolute authority to liquidate my personal real estate assets. This included the sprawling Buckhead estate I had purchased long before I ever put a wedding ring on my finger. If I signed this piece of paper, I would wake up a week from now with absolutely nothing. My life's work, my entire financial security would belong to a family that secretly despised me. Chloe tapped her designer shoe against the linoleum floor, clearly impatient with the charade. "Just sign on the dotted line, Zuri," she urged smoothly. "Tarek is down in the cafeteria getting coffee. He has been an absolute wreck over you. You should let him take the reins for a while. You know you have a bad habit of trying to control everything. It really is not healthy for your stress levels." The sheer audacity of her microaggression almost made me break character and laugh in her face. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I could not fight them physically, and calling a nurse right now would just lead to a shouting match where they would claim I was delirious from the medication. I needed to delay them while my attorney Roxanne executed the financial traps we had set up exactly for a worst-case scenario like this. I lifted the pen, forcing my hand to tremble violently. I let the metal tip hover just millimeters above the signature line. Geraldine leaned in close, her eyes wide with greedy anticipation. I could actually hear her holding her breath, waiting for the ink to touch the paper. Then I let my fingers go completely limp. The heavy silver pen slipped from my grasp, tumbled down the side of the blanket, and clattered loudly onto the hard hospital floor. "I am so sorry, Geraldine," I mumbled, letting my eyes roll back and my head sink heavily into the pillows. "I cannot see the lines. The room is spinning too fast. I am just so tired. I really need to sleep." Geraldine let out a sharp hiss of frustration, her fake sweet persona slipping for a fraction of a second. "Zuri, please, it will only take a second. Just hold the pen for me." Pen. I kept my eyes shut tight and let my breathing fall into a deep, steady rhythm, pretending to have passed out entirely. Chloe groaned loudly in the background. "Unbelievable," she muttered bitterly. "She is completely useless right now. We are going to have to wait until she wakes up again and try later." Before Geraldine could respond to her, the heavy door of the hospital room swung open with a violent thud. I kept my eyes closed but peeked through my eyelashes. It was Tarek, my husband of 4 years. The man who had held me when my mother passed away. The man who looked me in the eye at the altar and swore he would protect me from anything. He stormed into the room, his chest heaving under his tailored suit. He did not rush to my bedside to hold my hand. He did not look at the heart monitor to see if I was okay. He did not even look at my face to see if I was in pain. His eyes darted immediately to the floor where the pen lay, and then to the unsigned legal document resting on my chest. "Did she sign it?" Tarek demanded, his voice completely devoid of any warmth or concern. "She passed out again," Chloe complained from the corner. "She claims she cannot see straight enough to hold the pen." Tarek's jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked prominently in his cheek. He glared directly at his mother. "You told me those drops would make her compliant, not completely comatose. We need that signature today before her corporate lawyers start asking why she missed the morning board meeting." Hearing the absolute coldness in his voice shattered the last remaining illusion I had about my marriage. Tarek was not being manipulated by his mother. He was not being overly influenced by his wealthy white sister-in-law. He was the mastermind behind the entire plot. The man I loved had actively poisoned my drink at our anniversary dinner just to steal the empire I built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. I lay perfectly still in that hospital bed, breathing softly, while my world burned to the ground around me. They looked at me and thought they saw a weak, incapacitated woman who had finally been put in her proper place. They thought they had already won the game, but they had absolutely no idea that my attorney was already moving my assets into an impenetrable fortress. They wanted a war, and I was going to give them a massacre. I lay perfectly still, my breathing shallow, my eyes shut, listening to the heavy silence that followed Tarek's cold demand. He was furious that his mother had failed to secure my signature while I was drugged. I could hear the rustle of his expensive suit fabric as he took a deep, stabilizing breath. He was shifting gears. He was putting the mask back on. I felt the mattress dip as he sat in the chair beside my bed. He reached down and took my right hand. His fingers wrapped around mine, but it was not a comforting touch. His grip was rigid, clamping down so hard my knuckles ground together. It was a physical warning disguised as an embrace. I let out a soft, rehearsed moan, fluttering my eyelids open as if the pressure of his hand had just pulled me from a deep, medicated slumber. Tarek leaned over me, his face hovering just inches from mine. His expression was a flawless mask of husbandly concern, but his eyes were entirely dead. "Zuri, baby," he murmured, keeping his voice low and soothing. "You are pushing yourself into an early grave. I told you this would happen. You never stop. You never let anyone help you." I kept my gaze unfocused, staring weakly at his collar. I tried to speak, letting my voice crack and fade. "You have always been too independent, Zuri," he continued, his thumb rubbing the back of my hand with calculated rhythm. "You carry the entire weight of your company on your shoulders, and look what it has done to you. You are lying in a hospital bed, completely broken down. It breaks my heart to see you like this. You need to stop trying to control everything. Let me lead our family for once. Let me carry the burden." His words were supposed to sound like a lifeline, but they were dripping with a toxic, fragile ego. For 4 years, my success had been a mirror reflecting his own mediocrity. He did not want to carry my burden. He wanted to own my accomplishments. From the corner of the room, Chloe let out a soft, patronizing sigh. She stepped forward, the sharp click of her designer heels echoing against the linoleum. She stood next to Geraldine, crossing her arms and looking down at me with a mixture of pity and absolute disdain. "Tarek is right, Zuri," Chloe chimed in, her voice coated in that syrupy, entitled tone she always used when she wanted to put me in my place. "You really need to learn how to relax. You have money now. You do not need to keep hustling like you are still in the projects. It is just not a good look for the family. People in our circle know how to delegate. They know how to let their husbands manage the heavy lifting." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the sterile hospital air. The projects. I had never lived in the projects, but to Chloe, any black woman who had to build her own wealth from the ground up was a charity case who had somehow stumbled into high society. Chloe came from old Southern money. Her father was a real estate tycoon who had handed her a trust fund and a luxury lifestyle on a silver platter. She had never worked a 90-hour week. She had never stayed up for 3 days straight writing code in a cramped apartment, eating instant noodles, while pitching venture capitalists who looked at her like she was an alien. I had clawed my way into rooms that were designed to keep me out. I had built a financial technology firm that disrupted the market, earning every single dollar to my name. And yet, here was Chloe standing in her father-funded designer clothes, lecturing me about the proper way to be wealthy. What made it infinitely worse was Geraldine. My own mother-in-law nodded vigorously in agreement with Chloe. "Chloe is absolutely right," Geraldine said, stepping up to the other side of my bed. "Chloe comes from good established stock, Zuri. Her family understands legacy. They understand how to build generational wealth without working themselves into a hospital bed. You have done well for yourself, considering where you started, but you lack refinement. You are too hard. A real wife knows how to support her husband and let him be the man of the house. You are holding Tarek back by refusing to share your assets with him." The betrayal sliced through me, cold and precise. Geraldine was a black woman who had struggled financially her entire life, yet she worshipped Chloe's whiteness and generational wealth. while harboring a deep, venomous resentment for my self-made success. Geraldine hated me because I did not need her son to survive. She fawned over Chloe because Chloe represented the elite status Geraldine had always desperately craved but could never achieve. They were using Chloe's inherited privilege as a weapon to tear down my earned independence. The anger burning in my chest was a living, breathing thing demanding to be let out. I wanted to sit up, rip the IV out of my arm, and verbally destroy all three of them. I wanted to tell Tarek he was a pathetic failure who had to resort to poisoning his wife because he was too incompetent to build his own empire. I wanted to remind Geraldine that my company paid the mortgage on the luxury condo she loved to brag about at her country club. But I knew better. Emotion is the enemy of strategy. If I reacted now, I would lose the element of surprise. They needed to believe I was defeated. They needed to believe their poison had worked, stripping away my fight and leaving me compliant and weak. I let a single genuine tear slip from the corner of my eye. It was a tear of profound grief for the marriage I thought I had repurposed for the performance of a lifetime. I looked up at Tarek, making my eyes wide and entirely vulnerable. "You are right," I whispered, my voice trembling perfectly. "I am just so tired, Tarek. My body hurts. Everything hurts. I cannot do it anymore." Tarek's posture changed instantly. His chest literally puffed out under his suit jacket. The rigid, angry line of his jaw relaxed into a triumphant smirk. He leaned down and kissed my forehead, a chilling gesture of false affection. "I know, baby," he murmured softly. "I know. You just rest. I have got you now. I will handle the holding company. I will handle the board. You do not have to worry about a single thing ever again." I swallowed hard, keeping the illusion alive. The paper I rasped out, gesturing weakly toward the clipboard resting on the nightstand. "I tried to read it for your mother, but the words were just swimming. My vision is so blurry. If you just leave it right there, I promise I will sign it as soon as the room stops spinning. I want you to take over, Tarek. I really do. I just need a little more time to focus my eyes." The absolute submission in my voice acted like a drug to his fragile ego. He ate it up completely. He reached out and stroked my hair, playing the role of the benevolent savior. "There is no rush, my love," Tarek said, his voice dripping with false reassurance. "The paperwork is right here when you are ready. You just get some sleep." He stood up tall, turning to his mother and his sister-in-law. His entire demeanor screamed victory. He had broken the stubborn, independent wife. He had finally won. "Let us give her some peace and quiet," Tarek instructed them, taking on a tone of authority. "We can go down to the VIP lounge and grab some coffee. She will sign it when she wakes up." Geraldine smiled warmly at her son, completely satisfied. Chloe rolled her eyes, eager to leave the sterile environment, but she followed them toward the door. Tarek looked back at me one last time, a dark, calculating satisfaction lingering in his gaze before he pulled the heavy wooden door shut behind him. The loud click of the latch echoed through the quiet room. I lay still for exactly 10 seconds, listening to the fading sound of their footsteps retreating down the hospital corridor. Once I was absolutely certain they were gone, the weak, trembling facade vanished instantly. My breathing steadied. My vision was perfectly clear. I pushed myself up against the pillows, ignoring the dull ache in my head, and reached under the heavy hospital blankets to retrieve my phone. The screen was already lit up. A message had just come through from Roxanne, my brilliant, ruthless corporate attorney. I unlocked the screen, the blue light reflecting in the quiet, darkened room. I stared at the text message, my heart pounding a steady, rhythmic beat against my ribs. Roxanne's message was short, clinical, and devastating. A wire transfer for $4.2 million was just initiated from Tarek's laptop to an offshore account under Chloe's maiden name. The bank froze it immediately, exactly as we requested. "We have their IP address logged and secured." I read the words twice, letting the reality of their sheer greed wash over me. They were not even waiting for the ink to dry on the power of attorney. Tarek had used his access to our home network to attempt a massive illegal wire transfer, trying to funnel my liquid capital directly into an untraceable account controlled by his white sister-in-law. They were moving in for the kill, operating under the assumption that I was lying here, helpless and dying. I locked my phone, a cold, dangerous smile spreading across my face. They thought they were playing a game of chess with a sick woman. They had no idea I had already flipped the board. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. The footage continued playing, showing Geraldine nodding in enthusiastic agreement. She reached out and patted her son's shoulder, a gesture of maternal pride for a man who had just poisoned his own wife. "You did good," Tarek, Geraldine whispered on the recording. "She has had her time in the sun. It is our turn now." I paused the video, the image of their conspiring faces frozen on my monitor. The betrayal was so absolute, so meticulously orchestrated, that for a fraction of a second, I felt the air leave my lungs. I had paid off Geraldine's debt when she nearly lost her home. I had handed Tarek the title of vice president at my firm, a title he used to inflate his ego while contributing absolutely nothing to the company's bottom line. I had given them access to a life they could never have built on their own. And this was my reward. My phone buzzed again, breaking the heavy silence of the office. It was Roxanne calling. I accepted the call, putting her on speaker as I downloaded the hidden camera footage onto a secure flash drive. "They are moving faster than we anticipated," Roxanne said, her voice sharp and devoid of pleasantries. "The bank just flagged 3 more attempted transactions. Dion's company logistics account just tried to draw down a $500,000 line of credit against your primary corporate entity. Tarek is using the old authorization codes." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "They really think I am a fool, Roxanne. They think I am just a project girl who got lucky." "Let them think whatever they want," Roxanne replied coldly. "The blind trust restructuring is complete. The new corporate entity is fully sealed. The bait is set. Have you reviewed the debt load on the old shell company?" I pulled up the secondary financial portfolio on my laptop. When Tarek had begged me to help his family 2 years ago, I had not just handed them cash. I was too smart for that. I had routed the capital through a specific subsidiary company holding the collateral for Geraldine's luxury condo and Dion's failing logistics fleet in that subsidiary's name. If the debt was called in, they would lose everything. "It is all there," I confirmed, reading the bottom line. $8 million in outstanding liabilities, all legally tied to the corporate shell that Tarek thinks holds my net worth. "Good," Roxanne said. "Do not confront him. Do not go to the police yet. If you arrest him for assault now, Chloe and Dion will scurry back into the woodwork and claim ignorance. We need them all in the room. We need them to sign their own execution orders." I heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway outside. I glanced at the security monitors. Tarek's luxury sedan had just pulled up to the front gate. He was home from the hospital, likely panicking because I had disappeared from my bed before he could secure the signature. "He just pulled in," I told Roxanne. "I am going to give the performance of a lifetime." "Play weak Zuri," she reminded me. "Let the lion think the gazelle is already dead. I will see you in the boardroom." I hung up the phone and slammed the laptop shut. I grabbed a thick wool blanket from the leather sofa in my office and wrapped it tightly around my shoulders. I hurried out of the office and made my way to the sweeping staircase in the main foyer. I needed to be upstairs. I needed to look like I had barely survived the trip home. By the time the front door opened, I was sitting on the edge of the master bed, shivering violently under the blanket, my hair deliberately messy. Tarek burst into the bedroom, his eyes wild with frantic energy. He stopped short when he saw me sitting there. "Zuri!" he gasped, rushing across the plush carpet. "What are you doing here?" "The hospital called me in a panic. They said you walked out against medical advice." "Are you out of your mind?" I let my voice tremble, staring blankly at the floor. "I hated it there, Tarek. The lights were too bright. The machines were too loud. I just wanted to be in my own bed. I feel so sick." Tarek knelt in front of me, grabbing my hands. His skin was warm, but his touch felt like crawling insects. He was trying to assess my mental state, trying to see if I had the cognitive function to realize what he had done. "You cannot just leave a hospital when you are this weak," he scolded gently, playing the concerned husband. "You terrified me." I forced a tear to spill over my cheek. I am sorry. I just wanted to come home to you. Tarek's shoulders relaxed. The tension bled out of his face. He realized the drugs were still heavily affecting my behavior. He stood up, smoothing the front of his tailored suit. It is okay, baby. You are home now. But you need to stay in bed. I will go downstairs and make you some of that herbal tea you like. It will help you sleep. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to wipe the kiss away. I listened to his footsteps retreat down the stairs toward the kitchen. He was going to drug me again. The initial dose had worn off faster than he anticipated because of my adrenaline, and he needed me compliant for the final signature. I waited 5 minutes before slowly standing up and creeping toward the doorway. I stood in the shadow of the hall, watching the reflection of the kitchen in the large foyer mirror. I saw him standing by the marble island. He was holding my favorite ceramic mug. I watched as he pulled the same small, amber-colored vial from his pocket. He uncapped it and poured a generous amount of the clear liquid into the steaming tea, stirring it quickly with a silver spoon. He shoved the vial back into his pocket and turned toward the stairs. I scrambled back to the bed, pulling the heavy blankets up to my chin. Seconds later, Tarek walked into the room, holding the mug with both hands as if it were a precious gift. "Here you go, sweetheart," he murmured softly. "Drink this. It will help the body aches." I took the mug with shaking hands. The sweet smell of chamomile masked whatever chemical he had laced it with. I brought the rim to my lips, pausing just a fraction of an inch away. I tilted the mug, letting a tiny amount of the hot liquid coat my bottom lip without actually swallowing a single drop. "It is too hot," I whispered, pulling the mug away and setting it carefully on the nightstand. "I will drink it in a minute. Can you get me an extra pillow from the guest room? My back is killing me." Tarek frowned, looking at the untouched tea. "Drink it while it is warm, Zuri. It works better that way." I let out a pathetic whimper, clutching my lower back. "Please, Tarek, just the pillow first. It hurts so much." His annoyance flickered, but he nodded. "All right, just 1 second. Do not let that tea get cold." The second he stepped out of the master suite and headed down the hall toward the guest room, I grabbed the ceramic mug. I lunged toward the large potted ficus sitting in the corner of the bedroom. I poured the entire contents of the mug directly into the dark soil, watching the steaming liquid vanish into the dirt. I rushed back to the bed, sliding under the covers just as Tarek reappeared with a down pillow. I held the empty mug loosely in my hand, letting my head loll back against the headboard. "I drank it," I whispered, letting my eyes drift shut. Tarek walked over, taking the empty mug from my hand. He stared down into the ceramic depths, confirming it was gone. A slow, chilling smile spread across his handsome face. He set the mug on the nightstand and tucked the blankets tightly around my shoulders. "Good girl," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Rest now. I have invited the family over tomorrow for dinner to cheer you up. Bring your pen." The blue light of the laptop screen cast a cold, hollow glow across my face as I watched my husband seal my fate. Tarek stood right there in the digital playback of our kitchen, his back leaning casually against the marble island, dropping the clear liquid into my anniversary wine. My finger hovered over the keypad of my phone. 911. It would be so easy. A squad car would be at my front security gate in 4 minutes. They would bag the wine glass in the sink. They would slap cold steel cuffs on his wrists before the sun even finished setting. But as I stared at his pixelated face on the screen, a deeper, much colder rage settled into my bones. Arresting Tarek for attempted assault was a temporary victory. It would put him behind bars, but it would leave his parasite mother and his arrogant sister-in-law free to play the victims. Chloe would run straight to her wealthy father, spinning a narrative about how the angry, unstable black woman framed her. Geraldine would cry to her church group about the tragedy of her son being locked up, playing the grieving mother to perfection. No, prison was far too good for them. I did not just want to lock him up. I wanted to dismantle the very foundation of their lives. I deleted the emergency numbers from my screen. I closed the security footage application and opened a heavily encrypted folder on my private server. I needed to activate the financial fail-safes I had built years ago. I dialed Roxanne. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with corporate adrenaline. She had been monitoring the frozen offshore accounts, waiting for my next command. I told her about the video. I told her exactly what Tarek poured into my glass and what he said to Geraldine about keeping me bedridden. I heard Roxanne slam her palm flat against her mahogany desk on the other end of the line. I am calling the police right now, Zuri. She practically growled into the receiver. This has escalated from attempted wire fraud to attempted murder. I stopped her immediately. Do not call anyone, Roxanne. I need them all in the exact same room tomorrow. I need them to believe they have won. Roxanne sighed heavily, knowing better than to argue when my voice dropped to that specific icy register. What is the play? She asked. I pulled up the financial manifest for Obsidian Holdings. 2 years ago, Tarek came to me practically begging on his knees. Geraldine was months behind on the mortgage for her luxury Buckhead condo, and his brother Dion had driven his logistics fleet straight into a mountain of commercial debt. Tarek pleaded with me to just hand them the cash. He called it family duty. He tried to shame me, saying that since I made it out, I owed them. I refused to write a blank check to people who actively disrespected me every time I walked into a room. Instead, I quietly established Obsidian Holdings, a blind corporate entity. I used it to buy the debt on Geraldine's condo and bail out Dion's business. They thought some faceless venture capital firm had thrown them a miraculous lifeline. They had absolutely no idea that I held the collateral to their entire existence. Check the default clauses on the Obsidian accounts, I instructed Roxanne, keeping my voice low. She typed furiously on her end. The logistics fleet has missed 2 consecutive payments, she confirmed. And Geraldine is 30 days delinquent on her property taxes, which explicitly violates the terms of her master loan. The collateral is fully exposed. Excellent, I said. Draft the foreclosure notices and the asset seizure warrants. Have them ready to execute the second I give the signal. Tomorrow night they are going to try to force me to sign that power of attorney. They think it gives them the keys to my kingdom. I am going to make sure it hands them a ticking time bomb. The heavy rumble of the garage door opening vibrated through the floorboards. Tarek was back. I instantly ended the call with Roxanne. I slammed the laptop shut, locked the safe, and scrambled out of my home office. I needed to look exactly like the weak, broken woman he expected to find. I threw myself onto the velvet sofa in the living room, grabbing a thick cashmere throw blanket and wrapping it tightly around my shoulders. I messed up my hair, letting it fall wildly around my face, and forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. The door from the garage clicked open. Tarek walked into the living room, his tailored suit perfectly pressed, holding a plastic pharmacy bag. He stopped when he saw me on the couch. A flash of genuine panic crossed his face, quickly replaced by his carefully practiced mask of loving concern. Zuri, baby, what are you doing out of bed? He asked, dropping his briefcase on the hall table and rushing to my side. He knelt in front of the sofa, placing his hands on my knees. You are supposed to be resting. The hospital called me. They said you signed yourself out. You absolutely terrified me. I forced my eyes to well up with tears, looking down at him with an expression of pure exhaustion. I hated it there, Tarek. The lights were too bright and I kept hearing alarms. I just wanted to come home. I feel so incredibly weak. I let my head loll back against the cushions. Tarek sighed, a soft, indulgent sound that made my stomach turn. He brushed a stray curl from my forehead. It is okay. You are home now. But you need your rest. The doctors said you are severely dehydrated, and your nervous system is in shock. I am going to make you some of that chamomile tea you love. It will help you sleep. He stood up and walked into the kitchen. The layout of our open concept home allowed me to watch his reflection in the dark glass of the oven door. He turned his back to the living room, blocking his hands from my direct line of sight. But I watched the reflection clearly. He reached into his suit pocket. He pulled out a small dark vial. He unscrewed the cap with his thumb and poured a generous amount of clear liquid into the steaming mug. He stirred it rapidly with a silver spoon, shoved the vial back into his pocket, and turned around with a warm, caring smile. He walked back to the sofa, holding the mug with both hands as if it were a precious gift. Drink this, sweetheart, he murmured, sitting on the edge of the coffee table. It will take the edge off the body aches. I reached out with trembling hands. My fingers brushed against his, and it took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to recoil from his skin. The sweet floral scent of chamomile rose from the mug, masking a faint bitter chemical undertone that I would not have noticed if I had not been looking for it. He watched me intently, his eyes tracking my every movement like a predator waiting for its prey to finally collapse. I brought the rim of the mug to my lips. I tilted it slightly, letting the scalding liquid touch the very edge of my teeth, but I clamped my throat shut. I did not swallow a single drop. I pulled the mug away, letting out a soft, appreciative sigh. "It is perfect, Tarek," I whispered. "But it is just a little too hot right now." I lowered the mug to my lap, letting my hands shake just enough to look frail. "Can you do me a favor? My feet are freezing. Can you grab those thick socks from the top shelf of my closet?" Tarek frowned, his eyes locked obsessively on the full mug. "Drink it while it is hot, Zuri. It works better that way." I let out a pathetic, shaky whine, leaning heavily into the pillows. "Please, baby, I am so cold. My bones hurt." His jaw twitched with obvious annoyance, but he nodded. "All right, give me 1 second. Do not let that get cold." He turned and jogged up the sweeping wooden staircase. The absolute second his foot hit the top landing, I moved. I swung my legs off the sofa, leaned over the armrest, and tipped the large mug over the massive potted monstera plant sitting in the corner of the living room. I poured half the liquid directly into the dark, thirsty soil. I quickly wiped the rim of the mug with my thumb, leaving a faint smudge of my lip gloss on the edge to make it look completely authentic. I practically threw myself back under the cashmere blanket just as Tarek reappeared at the top of the stairs holding a pair of wool socks. He walked back down, his eyes immediately dropping to the mug in my hands. He saw the significantly lowered liquid level. He saw the lip gloss stain. A slow, chilling smile spread across his handsome face. He took the mug gently from my trembling fingers and set it on the coaster. He knelt down, slipping the thick wool socks onto my cold feet, playing the devoted caretaker perfectly. The heavy, suffocating humidity of the Atlanta evening pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Buckhead estate. I had discharged myself from the hospital against strict medical advice just hours earlier. The doctors had warned me about the lingering toxins in my bloodstream, but lying in that sterile room waiting to be attacked again was not a viable strategy. I needed home field advantage. I needed to control the battlefield. Roxanne, acting with her usual ruthless efficiency, had arranged for a private medical transport to bring me directly to my property, slipping me through the service gates to avoid any unwanted attention. She also secured the medical wheelchair currently parked at the head of my 12-foot mahogany dining table. I sat perfectly still in the leather seat, orchestrating my physical decline with absolute precision. I had spent 30 minutes in front of my vanity mirror, applying a pale ashy foundation beneath my eyes and a dry cracked powder over my lips. I traded my usual tailored silk blouses for an oversized shapeless cashmere robe that swallowed my frame, making me look fragile and small. I practiced letting my shoulders slump forward, forcing my breathing to remain shallow and erratic. For years I had been the apex predator in boardrooms across the country, a tech CEO who built algorithms to predict corporate behavior. Tonight I was predicting the exact threshold of perceived weakness required to trigger their absolute, unadulterated greed. At exactly 7 o'clock, the heavy oak front doors swung open. I heard the sharp, arrogant click of designer heels against the Italian marble foyer, followed by the low, conspiratorial murmur of voices. They were here. Tarek led the procession into the formal dining room, playing the role of the exhausted, dedicated husband, carrying the weight of the world. Right behind him was his mother, Geraldine, clutching a limited edition Birkin bag that I knew for a fact was purchased with my corporate dividends. Then came Dion, Tarek's older brother, a man whose sheer incompetence was only matched by his sense of entitlement. He strolled into my home looking entirely too comfortable, his eyes darting around the room as if taking inventory. Finally, there was Chloe, Dion's wife. She trailed behind them, running a critical appraising eye over the crystal chandelier above us. Chloe came from old Southern money and never missed an opportunity to remind us. They did not come alone. Hovering nervously behind Dion was a short, sweating man in a cheap, ill-fitting suit clutching a battered leather briefcase against his chest. Tarek stepped forward, his face arranged into a mask of deep manufactured sorrow. Zuri, baby, Tarek said, his voice dropping into a soothing, patronizing register. You should be resting upstairs. But since you insisted on doing this tonight, I brought Arthur. He is a private notary gracious enough to make a house call so we do not have to stress you out by going to an office. I knew exactly what Arthur was. He was a paid rubber stamp, a bottom feeder retained under the table to look the other way when a coerced signature was applied to a life-altering legal document. I let my head roll slightly against the back of the wheelchair, offering a weak, trembling nod. The private chef I had hired for the evening served a lavish 5-course spread, but the food remained entirely untouched. The air in the dining room practically vibrated with their impatience. The sheer magnitude of their greed was a physical presence at the table. Dion and Chloe whispered to each other continuously, openly calculating the resale value of the contemporary art collection hanging on my walls. Geraldine leaned across the table, placing her manicured hand over my limp, cold fingers. Zuri, sweetheart, you look absolutely terrible, she cooed, her voice a masterclass in fake maternal concern. You should not even be out of bed. We are just so worried about your health. You are working yourself into an early grave. I let out a weak, raspy breath, forcing my hand to tremble violently against the polished wood of the table. I wanted to see everyone, I whispered, letting my voice crack and fade perfectly. I wanted to make sure everything was settled. My health is failing so rapidly, Geraldine. I can feel my body giving up. I am finally ready to sign the power of attorney. The shift in the room was instantaneous and explosive. Dion dropped his silver fork, the heavy metal clattering loudly against his porcelain plate. Chloe sat up perfectly straight, her posture rigid, her eyes flashing with unrestrained, venomous triumph. Geraldine let out a long, theatrical sigh of relief, patting her chest, as if a great tragedy had just been averted. Tarek immediately stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor, and signaled for Arthur to approach the table. Arthur scrambled forward, unclasped his briefcase, and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He laid them precisely on the table in front of me, aligning the edges with trembling hands. Tarek walked around the large table and stood directly behind my wheelchair. He placed his hands heavily on my shoulders, squeezing them with a firm proprietary grip that made my skin crawl. He looked around at his family, commanding their attention for his final performance. Zuri, you have built something incredible. Tarek began, his voice thick with fake rehearsed emotion. You have dedicated your entire life to your company, and it has taken a terrible, devastating toll on your physical well-being. It breaks my heart to see you struggling like this, unable to manage your own life. But you do not have to carry this heavy burden alone anymore. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air for dramatic effect. By signing this document, you are letting me protect your legacy. I will step in, I will manage the assets, and I will ensure that this family is taken care of exactly as you would have wanted. You can finally rest, my love. Let me take the reins. I kept my gaze lowered, staring blankly at the bold black letters at the top of the document. Durable power of attorney and absolute asset assignment. It was the exact same masterfully drafted contract they had tried to force on me in the hospital room. It granted Tarek full unrestricted access to my personal accounts, complete voting rights on my board of directors, and the absolute authority to liquidate my corporate holding company, Obsidian Holdings. I lifted my right hand, allowing it to shake uncontrollably. Arthur quickly uncapped a heavy gold-plated fountain pen and handed it to me. I gripped it clumsily, letting the smooth metal slip awkwardly against my fingers. Take your time, baby, Tarek murmured softly near my ear, his breath hot against my neck. Just right there on the dotted line at the bottom. We will handle the rest. I pressed the nib of the pen to the thick cream-colored paper. I dragged the dark ink across the signature line, crafting a weak, jagged, nearly illegible version of my name. It was the perfect imitation of a broken woman whose nervous system was actively shutting down. The very second the pen lifted from the page, Tarek lunged forward. He eagerly snatched the document right out from under my hands, not even bothering to conceal the desperate animalistic greed flashing in his eyes. He handed it immediately to Arthur, who swiftly applied his official notary stamp and signature, pressing hard into the paper to make the transfer of power legally binding. A collective heavy exhale washed over the dining room. The suffocating tension completely evaporated, replaced instantly by the intoxicating high of stolen wealth. Dayon let out a loud, booming laugh, reaching eagerly for the bottle of vintage champagne resting in the silver ice bucket at the center of the table. "Well, I think a proper celebration is in order," Dayon announced, popping the cork loudly and pouring generous amounts of the sparkling liquid into the crystal flutes. He passed them quickly around the table, handing the final brimming glass to Tarek. Chloe leaned back in her upholstered chair, a deeply patronizing smirk stretching across her face. She looked at me not as a person, but as an obstacle that had finally been permanently removed. "To a well-deserved, very long retirement, Zuri," Chloe said, raising her crystal glass toward my wheelchair, "and to Tarek for finally stepping up and taking the reins. It is about time this family had some proper, competent leadership." Tarek smiled down at me, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated victory. He thought he had conquered me. He thought he had outsmarted the woman who built an empire while he played golf. "To family," Tarek declared loudly, raising his flute toward the ceiling. "To family," Geraldine, Dion, and Chloe echoed in perfect, sickening unison, their crystal glasses clinking together in a sharp symphony of absolute betrayal. I did not raise a glass. I placed both of my hands firmly on the leather armrests of the wheelchair. The violent trembling in my fingers stopped completely. My breathing, which had been shallow and ragged all evening, smoothed out into a slow, deliberate, powerful rhythm. I slowly lifted my head, feeling the muscles in my neck align. I let the exhausted, dying, compliant facade melt away, completely exposing the cold, calculating predator underneath. I locked eyes with Tarek, a sharp, terrifyingly clear smile breaking across my face. I watched the triumphant smirk on his lips falter for a fraction of a second as his brain struggled to register the sudden, chilling clarity in my gaze. The sick woman was gone. The architect of their destruction was sitting in her place. I leaned forward in the wheelchair, my voice cutting through the celebratory noise like a finely sharpened razor blade. "I really hope you read the corporate bylaws of my holding company before you sign that, Tarek," I whispered, the icy calmness of my tone instantly paralyzing the entire room. "Because you didn't just take my assets, you just assumed all of my liabilities." When I delivered my quiet warning from the confines of that medical wheelchair, his arrogant smirk had only faltered for a fraction of a second before returning in full force. He had looked down at me, completely convinced that my words were nothing more than the desperate, delirious ramblings of a heavily medicated dying woman. He had snatched the freshly notarized document from the table, practically shoving his mother and sister-in-law out the door to celebrate their stolen victory. They were so blinded by the allure of instant, unearned wealth that they did not bother to question the sudden clarity in my eyes. By the time the sun rose over the sprawling Atlanta skyline the next morning, their celebration had transformed into a relentless march of conquest. At exactly 9 o'clock, the polished steel elevator doors chimed open on the top executive floor of my financial technology firm. The headquarters was a masterpiece of modern architecture featuring sweeping walls of soundproof glass, minimalist white marble, and breathless panoramic views of the city I had conquered. It was a fortress built entirely on my intellect and relentless drive, and now the invaders had arrived to claim it. Tarek led the charge, flanked by Geraldine and Chloe. They had brought backup. Walking in lockstep behind them were two expensive hired gun corporate attorneys, men in sharp suits, clutching thick leather briefcases ready to execute a hostile takeover. Tarek strode up to the custom reception desk, his chest puffed out, radiating the unearned confidence of a man who believed he held the winning lottery ticket. He slammed the notarized power of attorney down on the pristine counter. The loud, aggressive smack of the paper echoed through the quiet, focused energy of the executive lobby. "I need you to summon the board of directors immediately," Tarek demanded, his voice booming with forced authority. "Cancel whatever meetings are on the books. Tell them the new interim chief executive officer is here to address the transition of power." The receptionist, a fiercely loyal woman named Sarah, who had been with me since my company operated out of a cramped co-working space, did not even blink. She glanced down at the document, then looked up at Tarek with an expression of polite, absolute indifference. "The board is already assembled in the primary conference room, sir," Sarah replied smoothly, gesturing toward the heavy frosted glass doors at the end of the corridor. "They are expecting you." Tarek puffed his chest out even further, turning to share a triumphant, predatory grin with his mother and Chloe. Geraldine smoothed the lapels of her jacket, practically vibrating with greedy anticipation. Chloe let out a soft, entitled laugh, her eyes scanning the expensive modern art hanging on the lobby walls, as if she were already deciding what to throw in the dumpster. They marched down the corridor like conquering royalty, the two corporate lawyers trailing obediently behind them. Tarek reached the end of the hall and pushed the heavy glass doors open with a violent, dramatic shove. He stepped into the massive, sun-drenched boardroom, ready to deliver his grand speech to a room full of panicked executives. Instead, he froze entirely in his tracks. The sprawling mahogany table was completely empty save for two people. I sat directly at the head of the table. I was not in a wheelchair. I was not wearing an oversized, shapeless robe. The pale, sickly makeup had been scrubbed clean from my skin. I was wearing a sharply tailored blood-red crimson suit that fit me like armor. My hair was flawlessly styled and my posture was rigid, upright, and absolutely lethal. I looked healthier, sharper, and more radiant than I had in years. Standing right beside my right shoulder, holding a sleek digital tablet and wearing a predator's smile, was my corporate attorney, Roxanne. The physical reaction from the invaders was instantaneous and completely visceral. Tarek's arrogant stride broke his expensive leather shoes, squeaking awkwardly against the hardwood floor as his brain violently short-circuited. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked physically ill. Behind him, Geraldine let out a sharp, genuine gasp, taking a stumbling step backward as if she had just seen a ghost. Chloe was the only one who found her voice, though it lacked its usual syrupy condescension. "What is this?" Chloe demanded, her eyes darting frantically around the empty room. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be bedridden. You are sick." I did not answer her. I simply laced my fingers together and rested them on the polished mahogany, holding Tarek's panicked gaze. Tarek swallowed hard, the muscles in his jaw ticking as he desperately tried to regain control of the narrative. He marched forward, though his hands were visibly shaking. He threw the notarized power of attorney onto the center of the table. "It does not matter that you are sitting here, Zuri." Tarek barked, his voice lacking its previous depth. His hired lawyers stepped up beside him, looking completely bewildered by the lack of an actual board of directors. "You signed the paperwork last night." Arthur notarized it. "This document gives me absolute irrevocable power over Obsidian Holdings. I control the voting shares. I control the liquid assets. I am in charge now. You need to vacate this chair." Roxanne let out a sharp, terrifying laugh. The sound cut through the tension like a whip. She tapped the screen of her tablet, bringing the massive wall-mounted projector screen behind me to life. "You should really fire whoever drafted that document for you, Tarek," Roxanne said, her voice dripping with clinical professional disdain. "It is a beautiful piece of legal fiction, but it is entirely useless." Tarek slammed his hands on the table. "It is legally binding. I watched her sign it." "Oh, the signature is absolutely valid," Roxanne countered smoothly, stepping forward. "But you see, Tarek, corporate law requires a basic understanding of what you are actually trying to steal. The power of attorney you forced upon my client specifically targets the entity known as Obsidian Holdings. And up until 48 hours ago, Obsidian Holdings was indeed the parent company of this entire financial technology empire." Tarek's eyes widened. A sickening realization began to creep into his expression. 48 hours ago, I leaned forward in my chair, the crimson fabric of my suit catching the morning sunlight. I decided it was time to put him out of his misery. "While you were busy slipping unprescribed muscle relaxants into my anniversary wine, I was busy executing a master restructuring plan," I said, my voice eerily calm, echoing off the glass walls. "I knew exactly what you and your mother were planning. I knew you were trying to drain me dry. So I authorized Roxanne to initiate an emergency corporate pivot." Roxanne tapped her tablet again. A complex organizational chart appeared on the projector screen behind me. illuminating the brutal reality of their situation. We stripped Obsidian Holdings down to the studs, Roxanne explained, her tone surgical. We transferred every single proprietary algorithm, every patent, all intellectual property, and every last cent of liquid capital out of Obsidian. We moved it all into a newly established, impenetrable blind trust registered in Delaware. A trust that Zuri retains absolute exclusive control over. Geraldine let out a loud, pathetic whimper, clutching the strap of her Birkin bag as if it were a life preserver. "So what does that mean?" Chloe demanded, her Southern Belle facade completely dropping, revealing the panicked, greedy opportunist underneath. What did he just take control of? I smiled. It was not a kind smile. I slid a sleek black leather folder across the long mahogany table. The folder glided smoothly over the polished wood, stopping perfectly right in front of Tarek's trembling hands. He stared down at it, as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. "Open it, Tarek," I commanded. His hands shook violently as he reached out and flipped the heavy cover open. His eyes scanned the top document, the color draining from his face, until he looked like a hollow shell of a man. The two hired lawyers leaned over his shoulder, reading the fine print. One of the lawyers immediately stepped back, shaking his head and slowly closing his briefcase, recognizing a sinking ship when he saw one. "The entity you now control has zero capital," I said, my voice ringing with absolute crushing finality. "But it does hold $8 million in toxic debt, debt that you are now personally responsible for." The heavy frosted glass doors of the boardroom slid shut with a definitive sealing click, cutting off the low ambient hum of the executive floor outside. The sudden silence inside the room was deafening, broken only by the quiet mechanical whir of the massive ceiling projector. High-definition footage continued to loop relentlessly on the wall behind me, casting a harsh pale light over the faces of my betrayers. On the screen, a digital, undeniable version of Tarek stood in our kitchen, unscrewing the amber vial and dumping unprescribed muscle relaxants into my anniversary wine. The three detectives from the Atlanta Police Department did not pause to introduce themselves. They did not ask for a summary of the corporate dispute taking place around the sprawling mahogany table. The lead detective, a broad-shouldered man with a gaze made of pure flint, bypassed the useless, fraudulent legal documents scattered across the wood. He walked directly toward the head of the table, his eyes locked entirely on my husband. "Tarek Vance." The detective stated, his voice a deep, authoritative rumble that shattered the remaining oxygen in the room. "You are under arrest for aggravated assault, domestic battery, and attempted murder." The color completely drained from Tarek's face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. His jaw went entirely slack. He looked from the looping video on the wall to the three armed officers advancing on him, his brain violently rejecting the reality of the moment. He took a stumbling step backward, holding his hands up in front of his chest as if he could physically push the criminal charges away. Wait, there is a misunderstanding," Tarek stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "This is a corporate transition. This is a private family matter. I am the chief executive officer of this company. You cannot just walk in here." "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the second detective ordered, grabbing Tarek by the shoulder and spinning him around with practiced, uncompromising force. Tarek let out a sharp cry of panic as his chest hit the mahogany table. The metallic, heavy click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed like a gunshot. He twisted his neck, his eyes wide and terrified, searching desperately for his hired legal counsel. "Do something," he screamed at the two men in sharp suits. "I pay you to protect me. Fix this." The two corporate attorneys exchanged a single panicked look before simultaneously taking a giant step away from him. "We represent the corporate entity in matters of civil contract law," the senior lawyer stated, his tone dripping with immediate self-preservation. "We do not represent you in any criminal capacity, Mr. Vance. We have absolutely no involvement in this." Tarek let out a strangled sob, realizing his armor had completely evaporated. He twisted toward his mother, his eyes pleading for salvation. "Mom, tell them I was just trying to calm her down. Tell them it was your idea to keep her compliant." Geraldine stared at her son, her chest heaving under her silk blouse. She looked at the handcuffs cutting into his wrists, and then she looked at the cold, hard faces of the detectives. I watched the calculation happen behind her eyes in real time. Geraldine had spent her entire life surviving by attaching herself to whoever possessed the most power. Right now, her son was a sinking ship, a man carrying $8 million in toxic corporate debt and facing decades in a federal penitentiary. Geraldine physically recoiled, pressing her back against the glass wall of the boardroom as if Tarek were infected with a deadly disease. "I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, Tarek." Geraldine shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the room. She pointed a shaking manicured finger at her own flesh and blood. "I am just a mother. I trusted you. You told me you were giving her a mild sleep aid because she was stressed. I had nothing to do with whatever poison you put in that poor girl's drink. I am innocent." Tarek stared at his mother, his jaw dropping in absolute paralyzed horror. The woman who had birthed him, the woman he had committed multiple felonies to impress and enrich, had just thrown him entirely under the bus to save her own luxury lifestyle. The profound betrayal broke whatever fight he had left in him. His knees buckled slightly, his weight supported only by the grip of the arresting officer. From the far end of the boardroom, Chloe realized the blast radius of this disaster was expanding. She was an intelligent, ruthless opportunist, and she knew her name was deeply embedded in the digital trail of my stolen assets. If Tarek was going down for attempted murder, the Financial Crimes Unit would be right behind these detectives tearing through the network logs. She needed an exit strategy, and she needed it immediately. I sat back in my chair watching with cold, clinical fascination as Chloe shifted her tactics. The arrogant, patronizing smirk she had worn since walking into my headquarters vanished. Her posture collapsed inward, her shoulders curling as she transformed herself into something small, fragile, and utterly defenseless. She let out a ragged, theatrical gasp, burying her face in her hands. When she looked back up, her eyes were swimming with perfectly timed crystalline tears. Her chest heaved with manufactured hyperventilation. She weaponized her vulnerability with terrifying precision, deploying a defense mechanism she had likely relied on her entire life of unchecked privilege. "Officers, please!" Chloe wept, her voice trembling as she looked up at the lead detective with wide, terrified eyes. "You have to understand, I am terrified. I had no idea any of this was happening. Tarek is a monster. He manipulated all of us. I am just his sister-in-law. He dragged me into this hostile environment, and I have been so afraid to speak up. I do not know anything about corporate structures or offshore accounts. I am a victim here, too." She let a single flawless tear track down her cheek, looking up at the officers with an expression of pure, unadulterated distress. She was actively hijacking the narrative. She was attempting to rewrite the reality of the room, casting herself as the delicate, frightened collateral damage, while subtly framing the situation as a terrifying dispute she had been trapped in against her will. I watched the societal conditioning kick in. It was instantaneous. The rigid, uncompromising posture of the detectives visibly softened. The youngest officer in the room actually took a half-step toward Chloe, reaching out a hand as if to steady her, his tone shifting from authoritative law enforcement to protective comfort. "Ma'am, it is all right," the young officer murmured, his voice lowering soothingly. "You are safe now. Just take a deep breath." The sheer audacity of the performance was almost impressive. Chloe was using her tears as a shield, trusting that the system would automatically default to protecting a wealthy crying white woman in distress, even while the actual victim of poisoning and corporate theft sat right across the table. She looked past the officer, shooting me a split-second venomous glare of triumph through her tears. She thought she had found the loophole. She thought she was going to walk out of my building and straight back to her trust fund. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not give them the angry, aggressive reaction Chloe was hoping to provoke. I simply uncrossed my legs, stood up from my leather chair, and smoothed the front of my crimson suit. I picked up a thick, unmarked manila folder that Roxanne had placed on the table exactly for this moment. The heavy thud of the folder hitting the wood drew the lead detective's attention back to me. Detective, before you offer her a tissue, you might want to review Exhibit B. I said, my voice cutting through Chloe's fake sobbing with absolute icy authority. I slid the manila folder across the long stretch of mahogany. It glided smoothly, coming to a dead stop right against the lead detective's hand. He frowned, looking from my calm expression to the crying woman in the corner before flipping the heavy cover open. While my husband was busy playing the role of the amateur assassin, his sister-in-law was acting as the designated fence for my stolen capital. I stated, my tone remaining completely flat and conversational. Inside that folder, you will find the frozen bank logs from last night. At exactly 9:14 in the evening, while I was incapacitated, a wire transfer for $4.2 million was initiated against my primary holding account. Chloe's sobbing hitched, a genuine note of panic finally creeping into her lungs. You will also find the certified IP logs tracing that exact transfer request directly to the mobile device and personal laptop currently sitting in Chloe Vance's designer handbag. I continued, pacing slowly behind my chair. Furthermore, Detective, you will find the registration documents for an offshore account located in the Cayman Islands. An account that was established 72 hours ago, listing Chloe's maiden name as the sole exclusive beneficiary of the stolen funds. She is not a frightened bystander. She is the financial architect of a multi-million-dollar wire fraud conspiracy. The lead detective scanned the highlighted lines of the bank manifests, cross-referencing the IP addresses with the offshore account registration. The sympathetic softness in his posture vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, hardened professional disgust. He realized instantly that he had been played. He closed the folder with a sharp snap and looked directly at his partner. Chloe Vance, the lead detective, announced, his voice echoing loudly in the glass room. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and grand larceny. The transformation was absolute. Chloe's weaponized tears stopped instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch inside her brain. The fragile, frightened victim mask shattered completely, revealing the snarling, arrogant predator underneath. As the female detective grabbed her arm and pulled her hands behind her back, Chloe turned completely feral. Get your hands off me, Chloe shrieked, thrashing wildly against the officer's grip, her designer heels kicking out at the mahogany table. You cannot do this to me. Do you know who my family is? Do you have any idea who my father is? He will have your badges for this. He will destroy this entire department. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking around her wrists sent her into a blind, entitled rage. She twisted her neck, glaring at her husband, who was standing frozen against the wall, entirely useless. Dayon, do not just stand there like a pathetic idiot. Chloe screamed, the veins bulging in her neck as the detectives dragged her toward the boardroom doors. Call my father. Call him right now. Tell him to get his legal team down here immediately. Fix this Dion. Dion scrambled his hands, shaking so violently he nearly dropped his phone on the floor. He fumbled with the screen, desperately trying to dial his powerful father-in-law to save them from the nightmare they had walked into. I rested my hands on the back of my leather chair, a slow, razor-sharp smile spreading across my face, as I watched the empire they tried to steal crush them instead. Go ahead, Dion, I said, my voice ringing clear and steady over the chaos of the arrests. Call him. I already did. The heavy frosted glass doors of the boardroom slid shut instantly, muting the frantic, echoing shrieks of Chloe Vance as the detectives dragged her toward the executive elevator bay. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers pulsed dimly through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, rhythmic shadows across the polished mahogany table. The suffocating high-stakes tension that had gripped my company headquarters just moments prior completely dissolved, leaving behind a pristine, echoing silence. Roxanne stood beside me, her arms crossed over her chest. She let out a long, slow breath, a rare, genuine smile breaking across her usually stoic face. She looked down at the voided, utterly useless power of attorney document Tarek had so proudly slapped on the desk, now lying abandoned next to an overturned leather briefcase. We had them. We had captured the entire treasonous faction of the Vance family in a perfectly constructed legal bear trap. But I did not waste a single second savoring the victory. Sending Tarek and Chloe to a federal penitentiary was only the overture to my symphony of retaliation. A criminal trial would take months, possibly years, of grueling depositions, expensive defense attorneys, and endless appeals. I had absolutely no intention of waiting for a judge to dismantle the rest of their parasitic existence. I wanted them stripped down to the absolute bone by sunset. I turned to Roxanne, my voice sharp, authoritative, and entirely devoid of emotion. Execute Phase 2. Roxanne's smile vanished instantly, replaced by her ruthless, cold-blooded corporate efficiency. She tapped the screen of her digital tablet, waking up the main projector again. The complex organizational charts and hidden financial ledgers for Obsidian Holdings populated the massive screen. We had deliberately allowed Geraldine and Dion to default on their secret loans months ago, burying the late notices in legal red tape, just waiting for the perfect moment to drop the guillotine. Send the foreclosure notices to the property managers and the fleet dispatchers, I instructed, watching the red flags illuminate across the digital ledger. Do not give them a 30-day grace period. Do not give them 24 hours. They violated the morality and criminality clauses embedded in the master contracts. The second Tarek poured that poison into my glass. I want every single asset seized immediately. Burn their safety nets to the ground. Roxanne's fingers flew across the glass screen. Consider it done. The asset seizure warrants are hitting the local sheriff's dispatch right now. Across town, in the heart of Buckhead's most exclusive high-rise district, Geraldine Vance stepped out of the back of a luxury rideshare. She had fled my corporate headquarters the absolute second the detectives produced the steel handcuffs, practically trampling her own son to escape the blast radius. She abandoned her golden child to the criminal justice system without a second thought to save her own skin. She looked exhausted, her perfectly coiffed hair slightly frazzled by the humid Georgia air. All she wanted was to retreat into her sprawling multi-million-dollar luxury condo, pour herself a heavy glass of top-shelf scotch, and figure out how to distance her public reputation from the catastrophic legal fallout. She walked up the manicured, pristine walkway toward her private ground-floor entrance, her designer heels clicking unsteadily against the pavement. She stopped dead in her tracks. Lining the curb, sitting directly next to the municipal waste bins, was a mountain of heavy-duty black plastic trash bags. They were stuffed to the absolute brim, bulging awkwardly. Poking out of the top of one loosely tied bag was the unmistakable handcrafted leather handle of a limited edition Hermes Birkin bag. Geraldine let out a strangled, horrified gasp. She practically lunged at the garbage bags, her manicured claws tearing at the cheap plastic. It was all there. Her imported Italian silk dresses, her extensive collection of designer shoes, her velvet jewelry boxes, all unceremoniously dumped into trash bags like discarded takeout containers. She scrambled up the steps to her front door, her hands shaking violently as she dug through her purse for her keys. She shoved the brass key into the lock, but it would not turn. She pushed harder, rattling the heavy handle with frantic, pathetic desperation. The lock cylinder had been entirely replaced. Taped directly at eye level on the dark mahogany door was a bright yellow legal document. Geraldine ripped it down her eyes, scanning the bold block letters. Notice of immediate eviction and asset seizure. Property of Obsidian Holdings. Geraldine let out a guttural, terrifying scream. She pounded her fists against the heavy wood, begging for someone to open the door. The building manager, a man who had endured her entitled, condescending abuse for years, stepped out of the leasing office adjacent to her unit. He did not look sympathetic. He looked incredibly satisfied. "You need to vacate this premises immediately," Mrs. Vance, the manager said, crossing his arms over his chest. "The new property owners have officially taken possession of the unit due to a massive uncured breach of contract. Your accounts are frozen, your keycard is deactivated. And if you do not step away from the door right now, I am legally obligated to call security to have you escorted off the grounds for trespassing." Geraldine fell to her knees right there on the pristine concrete, clutching a trash bag full of couture clothing to her chest. Neighbors walking their dogs openly stared at the wealthy socialite crying in the dirt. She was officially homeless and utterly destitute. The sun was beginning to dip below the Atlanta skyline as I finally walked out of the glass-walled headquarters. The humid evening air hit my face, a stark contrast to the perfectly climate-controlled environment of my executive suite. I walked purposefully toward my waiting private car, Roxanne trailing a few steps behind me, while analyzing the latest financial shockwaves we had just unleashed upon the city. Before I could reach the heavy tinted door of my vehicle, a figure lunged out from the dark, shadowy alcove of the concrete parking garage. Roxanne instantly stepped in front of me, her hand reaching into her tailored jacket, but I held up a single finger motioning for her to stand down. It was Dion. Tarek's older brother looked absolutely unhinged. His expensive suit jacket was wrinkled and stained with sweat. His silk tie was ripped open, hanging loosely around his neck. The arrogant, greedy smirk he had worn while pouring champagne in my dining room was entirely gone. He looked like a cornered, terrified animal. "Zuri, please," Dion begged, his voice cracking violently as he took a cautious step forward, holding his hands up in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "You have to stop this. You have to call off the holding company right now." I stood perfectly still, my expression an unreadable mask of ice. "Call off what exactly, Dion?" "My trucks!" He gasped, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. "The dispatchers just called me in a panic. Federal marshals showed up at the lots 10 minutes ago with seizure warrants. They are impounding my entire logistics fleet. They are locking the gates and chaining the steering wheels. Zuri, that company is my entire life. It is the only thing I have left in this world. You cannot take my business." I tilted my head, looking at him with deep, calculated disgust. "You did not seem to care about my life 24 hours ago, Dayon. I remember you sitting at my dining table, drinking my vintage wine, openly calculating the resale value of my art collection while I was supposedly dying in a wheelchair. You were thrilled to take everything I built." Dion fell to his knees on the hard concrete. The sound of his bones hitting the pavement echoed loudly in the empty garage. He pressed his palms together, openly weeping, utterly devoid of pride. It was Tarek. Dion sobbed, throwing his own blood under the bus without a single second of hesitation. "Tarek forced me to do it. He told me that if I did not play along and support his power of attorney, he would cut off the funding to my fleet. He threatened to let me go bankrupt. I was just trying to survive, Zuri. I knew nothing about the poison. I swear to God, I am innocent. Please, you have already destroyed him. You do not have to destroy me too. Have some mercy." I looked down at his weeping form. "Mercy is a privilege reserved for the loyal," I whispered, my voice dripping with absolute venom. "You are a parasite. Your logistics firm was technically bankrupt 3 years ago. I kept it afloat because I thought you were family. But you chose to align yourself with a murderer to line your own pockets. The foreclosure stands, Dion. You have exactly nothing." I turned on my heel, signaling for my driver to open the heavy car door. I was finished with the Vance family. I wanted to go home, pour a glass of actual untainted wine, and sleep for the first time in weeks. "Wait!" Dion screamed, his voice turning shrill and frantic as he scrambled to his feet. He lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the car door before I could slide inside. "If begging will not work, let me buy my fleet back. Let me trade you something." I paused, glancing back at him over my shoulder. "You have zero, capital zero assets and zero leverage. You have absolutely nothing to trade." "I have a secret." Dion hissed, his eyes wide and completely manic. "A secret that affects your entire empire." I stared at him, my patience rapidly evaporating. "You have 5 seconds before Roxanne calls the police and has you arrested for harassment." Dayon swallowed hard, wiping the thick layer of sweat from his forehead. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a desperate, ragged whisper. "Tarek didn't just target you for your current money, Zuri. You think you know the whole scope of his greed, but you are blind to the foundation. He has been hiding a $10 million crypto wallet offshore." My eyes narrowed slightly. Tarek barely understood basic accounting software. The idea of him successfully managing a massive encrypted cryptocurrency wallet was laughable. "And why should I care about a hidden wallet I can easily have seized through the divorce courts?" I asked coldly. "Because of where the money came from," Dion fired back, his breathing ragged. "Tarek did not earn it, and he did not steal it from you. He stole the seed money for your company from someone else. That clean angel investor grant you got 7 years ago? The one that launched your entire fintech empire. It was dirty money, Zuri. Tarek stole it from a cartel, washed it through your startup, and kept the profit. They are looking for it, and they think you are the one who took it. I stared at Dion, the harsh fluorescent lighting of the parking garage, casting deep shadows across his terrified face. The sheer absurdity of his confession hung in the humid air. Tarek, a man who could barely balance a checkbook without my intervention, orchestrating a $10 million crypto laundering scheme seemed entirely impossible. But the raw, unadulterated panic radiating from Dion was not a performance. He fully believed every word he was saying. I signaled my driver. The heavy tinted window rolled up, cutting off the sound of Dion sobbing on the concrete. The car accelerated smoothly out of the garage, plunging us into the neon-lit streets of downtown Atlanta. I sat in the plush leather seat, the silence in the cabin deafening. I thought I had reached the absolute bottom of Tarek's betrayal. I thought the poisoned wine, the forced power of attorney, and the attempt to steal my current empire were the full extent of his sociopathic greed. But Dion's panicked words tore open a completely new abyss. The seed money. The pristine, miraculously timed angel investment of $2.5 million that had saved my first startup 7 years ago. The capital that had built the very foundation of Obsidian Holdings. If that money was dirty, if it was stolen, then my entire empire was a monument to a crime. Roxanne did not say a word. She simply pulled her encrypted tablet from her briefcase, her fingers flying across the glass screen. By the time we passed the security gates of my Buckhead estate, she had already bypassed 3 external firewalls to access the deeply archived financial records from my company's first fiscal year. We walked straight past the grand foyer and bypassed the master suite, entirely heading directly down to my subterranean command center. The room was soundproof, heavily secured, and lined with massive digital monitors. I bypassed the environmental controls and poured 2 glasses of scotch. We were not sleeping tonight. Pull up the original funding manifest for Sterling Vanguard Partners, I commanded, setting a glass down next to Roxanne's keyboard. Sterling Vanguard Partners was the faceless proxy entity that had injected the crucial seed money into my startup. At the time, Tarek had claimed he leveraged a connection from his college fraternity to secure the meeting. I had been so desperate to keep my servers running, so exhausted by endless rejections from traditional venture capitalists, that I had accepted the wire transfer without conducting my usual ruthless due diligence. It was the only blind spot in my entire professional career. Roxanne's eyes darted across the glowing code on her screen. She ran a deep forensic trace on the routing numbers, ignoring the shell companies and dummy corporations designed to mask the origin of the funds. Dion is an idiot, Roxanne stated, her voice flat and clinical in the quiet room. Tarek fed him a fairy tale about a cartel to keep him terrified and compliant. This money did not come from a criminal syndicate. It came from a domestic escrow account. She tapped a key, throwing the banking ledger onto the massive wall monitor. I approached the screen, my eyes scanning the heavily redacted transfer logs. Roxanne ran a decryption algorithm, slowly unpeeling the layers of corporate camouflage Tarek had paid a premium to establish. The name on the original drained account finally materialized in stark white letters against the black background. Maya Linwood. I stared at the name, a sickening wave of cold realization washing over me. I knew that name. I had never met her, but I knew exactly who she was. Maya Linwood was a brilliant software engineer, a young, driven black woman Tarek had dated for 2 years right before he met me. Tarek had always dismissed her as unstable, a crazy ex-girlfriend who could not handle the pressure of the tech industry. Roxanne cross-referenced the dates of the Sterling Vanguard wire transfer with Maya Linwood's digital footprint. The timeline was utterly devastating. 7 years ago, Maya had filed preliminary patents for a revolutionary algorithmic framework. 30 days later, she suffered a catastrophic financial collapse. Her startup accounts were completely drained. Her intellectual property filings were mysteriously withdrawn by a secondary signatory. That signatory was Tarek. He had coerced her into granting him temporary financial proxy during a fabricated company crisis, drained her entire life savings, and stole her foundational code. 14 days after he destroyed Maya, Tarek walked into my life. I gripped the edge of the sleek metal desk, my knuckles turning white. The sheer magnitude of the long con settled heavily into my bones. Tarek had not just married me for love, and he had not just grown greedy over time. Our entire relationship was a premeditated parasitic incubation period. He had stolen raw, unpolished genius from Maya, but he lacked the intellect and the ruthless business acumen to actually monetize it. So he found me. He washed Maya's stolen money through a proxy, handed it to me as an angel investment, and watched as I spent 7 years bleeding, sweating, and sacrificing to turn that seed capital into a billion-dollar empire. He used me to build the house, and he planned to murder me to take the keys. Find her. I ordered, my voice vibrating with a dark, uncompromising rage. Find Maya right now. Roxanne's fingers blurred across the keyboard. She bypassed the standard search engines, diving into deeply buried employment registries and tax databases. Tarek had not just stolen from Maya. He had actively destroyed her reputation to ensure she could never threaten his stolen narrative. He had leveraged his wealthy fraternity brothers to bury her in frivolous breach of contract lawsuits, effectively blacklisting her from every major tech firm in the country. I have her. Roxanne said, her tone heavy with disgust. She is working as a level 1 server technician at a regional logistics warehouse on the outskirts of Atlanta. She is logging 60-hour weeks just to cover her basic living expenses and the remaining legal debt Tarek saddled her with. Print the original architectural code files from her stolen patents, I said, grabbing my coat from the back of the chair. And draft an executive equity contract. Full corporate privileges, absolute immunity. Roxanne looked up, her eyebrows raised in surprise. Zuri giving away a percentage of Obsidian Holdings right now could complicate the SEC filings. I refuse to build my kingdom on the bones of another woman. I replied, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. Tarek stole her foundation, and he used me to do it. I am going to make it right. Draft the contract. The morning sun was struggling to pierce through the heavy gray cloud cover when my driver pulled into the cracked, pothole-ridden parking lot of a 24-hour diner just off Interstate 20. It was a bleak, miserable place, a far cry from the glittering glass towers of Buckhead. I left Roxanne in the car. This was not a corporate negotiation. This required a different approach. I pushed through the rusting glass doors. The smell of stale coffee and burnt grease hung thickly in the air. I spotted her immediately. Maya Linwood sat alone in a cracked vinyl booth in the far corner. She wore a cheap faded blue polo shirt bearing the logo of the logistics warehouse. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes staring blankly at a cold cup of coffee. She looked utterly exhausted, a brilliant mind ground down into dust by a man who had taken everything from her. I walked across the sticky linoleum floor and slid into the booth directly across from her. Maya looked up, annoyance flashing across her face at the intrusion. The annoyance instantly morphed into sheer, unadulterated shock as she recognized me. She knew exactly who I was. My face had been plastered across Forbes and the Wall Street Journal for years. I was the woman married to the man who ruined her life. Panic seized her features. She immediately grabbed her purse, pressing herself against the back of the booth as if preparing to bolt. "What are you doing here?" Maya demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and deep-seated anger. "If Tarek sent you to threaten me again, you can tell him I have nothing left. I am done. Just leave me alone." I did not flinch. I kept my hands resting visibly on the scratched laminate table, offering no sudden movements. "Tarek did not send me Maya," I said, my voice steady, projecting absolute calm. "Tarek is currently sitting in a federal holding cell facing charges for attempted murder and wire fraud. He is never going to threaten you again." Maya froze. Her hands stopped digging frantically into her purse. She stared at me, searching my face for any sign of a trap. "Arrested." I nodded slowly. "I know what he did to you. I know about the Sterling Vanguard proxy. I know about the intellectual property theft. I spent the entire night tracing the digital blood trail he left behind. He stole your code, he stole your seed money, and he washed it through my startup. He used both of us, Maya. He used your genius to fund it, and he used my drive to build it." Maya let out a ragged, shaking breath. Tears welled up in her eyes, years of gaslighting and isolation finally validating themselves in a single moment. I tried to tell people, she whispered, her voice cracking. I tried to fight him. But he had so much money, and he made me look completely insane. I know, I said gently. But the era of Tarek Vance controlling our narratives ended last night. I reached inside my tailored jacket and pulled out the thick, embossed leather folder Roxanne had drafted. I slid it across the greasy table. It stopped directly over her cold cup of coffee. "What is this?" Maya asked, wiping her eyes and staring down at the document. "That is a legally binding executive equity transfer," I explained. "It officially acknowledges you as the foundational architect of Obsidian Holdings. It restores your intellectual property rights, grants you full executive immunity, and transfers exactly 20% of my entire financial technology empire directly into your name." Maya stared at me as if the sky had just fallen. 20%, she gasped, the sheer magnitude of the number rendering her breathless. "Why are you doing this? You do not owe me anything. You did not know." "Because I refuse to be the beneficiary of your destruction," I replied, leaning forward against the table. "I am giving you back your life, Maya. I am giving you back your empire." She reached out with a trembling hand, her fingers tracing the heavy embossed seal on the contract. But she hesitated, her brilliant analytical mind catching up to the reality of the situation. She looked up at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You are a CEO, Zuri," Maya said, her voice dropping to a cautious whisper. "You do not just hand over a fifth of $1 billion company out of the goodness of your heart. There is a catch. What do you want?" A sharp, dangerous smile spread across my face. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the leather cover of the folder. "Tarek stole your foundation," I said, my voice cold and absolute. "I am giving you 20% of the empire. But first, I need you to help me hack his hidden crypto wallet." Maya stared at the embossed leather folder resting on the greasy diner table. The air between us was completely still, save for the low hum of the malfunctioning neon sign buzzing through the window. For 5 years, she had been ground into the dirt by a man who possessed a fraction of her intellect. She had been isolated, gaslighted, and legally suffocated. Now I was offering her the sword. She did not hesitate. Maya reached across the table, grabbed the pen I had placed next to the contract, and signed her name with a sharp, aggressive slash of black ink. She looked up, her eyes burning with a newly ignited white-hot fury. "Let us go tear his digital life apart," Maya said. Within the hour, my private driver pulled through the heavily fortified security gates of my Buckhead estate. We bypassed the formal living quarters, completely descending directly into my subterranean command center. The room was a windowless, climate-controlled vault lined with high-definition monitors and isolated servers. Roxanne was already there, establishing a secure, untraceable server relay. Maya dropped her worn canvas backpack onto the floor and took the primary seat at the center console. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a fraction of a second before descending in a chaotic, brilliant blur of motion. The defeated, exhausted woman from the diner vanished entirely. In her element, Maya was a terrifying force of nature. I stood behind her right shoulder, providing the strategic framework. "Tarek is fundamentally lazy," I told her, my eyes tracking the cascading lines of code illuminating the dark screens. "He masks his incompetence with arrogance. He will not have built a custom security protocol for this wallet. He will have purchased something off the shelf or repurposed an existing encryption model. Look for overlapping login habits. He always uses variations of significant dates and addresses to anchor his passwords." For the next 48 hours, the command center became a war room. We existed on a steady diet of black coffee and sheer, unadulterated adrenaline. Maya mapped Tarek's entire digital footprint, tracing every single keystroke he had made on our home network over the past 3 years. She isolated a recurring string of encrypted data packets bouncing between a dummy email account and a secure server located in the Seychelles. "He is using a tumbling service to mask the origin of the crypto," Maya stated, her eyes locked on the scrolling data. "It is a sophisticated laundering technique designed to break the digital chain of custody. But whoever set this up for him made a critical error in the routing sequence. They left a backdoor open in the secondary authentication node." She tapped a series of commands isolating the final firewall protecting the hidden wallet. A password prompt blinked aggressively on the center monitor. It is a heavily encrypted multi-signature vault, Maya explained, her brow furrowing in concentration. We need the primary seed phrase to break the first layer. I leaned closer to the screen, analyzing the structure of the prompt. Tarek was a narcissist. He always kept his trophies close. Try the original patent filing number from the intellectual property he stole from you, I commanded. Maya's jaw tightened. She typed the alphanumeric sequence of her stolen life's work into the terminal. She hit enter. The screen flashed bright green. The vault unlocked. Tarek was arrogant enough to use the very thing he stole to lock the door to his stolen fortune. The digital ledger populated across the monitors, displaying a staggering balance of $10.4 million in decentralized assets. But the victory was instantly overshadowed by a much darker, far more dangerous realization. This is a joint custody wallet, Maya said, her voice dropping to a cautious whisper. Tarek holds the primary key, but the assets cannot be liquidated or transferred without authorization from the secondary key holder. He does not actually control this money. He is just holding it for someone else. Trace the secondary key, I ordered, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Find the origin point. Maya launched a relentless tracking algorithm, forcing the encrypted node to reveal its routing history. The IP address bounced frantically across the globe, routing through virtual private networks in Switzerland, Panama, and Singapore, before finally anchoring to a static physical server. I stared at the physical address populating on the screen. I recognized it immediately. It was not a cartel hideout. It was not a shadowy international syndicate. It was the corporate headquarters of Wellington Global. Wellington Global was a massive, fiercely private equity firm operating out of Boston. And the chief executive officer of Wellington Global was William Sterling, Chloe's father. The pieces of the puzzle violently slammed together, creating a picture so sickening I had to grip the edge of the metal desk to steady myself. Tarek had not acted alone. Tarek did not possess the high-level financial infrastructure required to launder $10 million in stolen cryptocurrency. He needed a bank. He needed an institution willing to wash the dirty assets and integrate them into the legitimate financial system. William Sterling had provided that infrastructure. Chloe's father was the silent architect of the entire operation. They had orchestrated the entire narrative from the very beginning. Chloe had purposely introduced Tarek to me 7 years ago. They knew I was a rising star in the tech world, with an immaculate, untouchable public reputation. They used me. They engineered our marriage to create a legitimate, high-profile front. They injected Maya's stolen seed money into my startup betting on my relentless drive to turn it into a massive, profitable empire. Once my company was fully established and beyond reproach, they planned to use Obsidian Holdings to silently wash the remaining $10 million of Williams' illicit crypto. The poison in my wine was not just about Tarek wanting a payout. It was an executive decision made by the Sterling family to finally cash out their investment and permanently silence the only person who could expose them. The heavy steel door of the command center suddenly hissed open. Roxanne marched into the room, her usual pristine composure entirely shattered. She looked furious. "We have a massive problem," Roxanne announced, throwing her encrypted phone onto the desk. "What is happening at the police precinct?" I demanded, turning away from the monitors. "The system is folding." Roxanne spat, her voice vibrating with disgust. "I have been monitoring the district attorney's office all morning. William Sterling just landed his private jet at DeKalb Peachtree Airport. He brought a small army of fixers and white-collar defense attorneys with him. They are completely steamrolling the local prosecutors." I crossed my arms over my chest, my mind racing. On what grounds? We handed them the IP logs. We gave them the offshore account registrations proving Chloe committed wire fraud. William's legal team is burying the district attorney in procedural injunctions, Roxanne explained rapidly. They are claiming the evidence was obtained through illegal corporate espionage. They reached out to a federal judge that William went to Yale with, and the judge is issuing an emergency gag order on the financial documents. Chloe's charges are being downgraded to a misdemeanor misunderstanding. They are letting her walk. And Tarek, I asked, my voice dangerously low. William just posted his bail through an anonymous shell company. Roxanne replied, her jaw tightly clenched. Tarek is being released within the hour. The Atlanta police cannot hold him if a federal judge is actively dismantling the foundation of the arrest warrants. William is using his political connections to rewrite reality. The justice system is completely bending to his money. I stared at the blank wall, the cold, heavy realization settling over me. The courts were not going to save me. The police were a minor inconvenience to a man possessing William Sterling's level of generational wealth and entrenched political corruption. He was shielding his daughter and rescuing his pawn. If I wanted to survive this, if I wanted to protect the empire I had bled for, I could not rely on the law. I had to become the executioner. Lock down the servers, I instructed Maya, my voice stripped of all emotion. Transfer the executive control protocols to my personal device and sever the hard lines. If William thinks he can muscle his way into my domain, he is severely underestimating the battlefield. I left Roxanne and Maya in the subterranean vault, needing the physical space to calculate my next strategic strike. I stepped into the private elevator, pressing the button for the main floor. I needed to access my physical safe in the master suite to retrieve the secondary blackmail files I kept for absolute emergencies. The elevator doors glided open on the ground floor. I stepped out into the grand foyer and immediately stopped dead in my tracks. The house was entirely too quiet. The dedicated private security detail I had hired to monitor the perimeter and patrol the interior was completely missing. There were no footsteps echoing in the halls. There was no static chatter from the security radios. The atmosphere was thick, heavy, and deeply wrong. I walked slowly toward the formal living room, my heels completely silent against the thick Persian rugs. Standing on either side of the wide-arched entryway were two massive, highly trained men wearing unmarked black suits and earpieces. They were not my security. They were private military contractors. They did not move to stop me, simply watching me with cold, dead eyes as I stepped into my own living room. Sitting comfortably on my custom velvet sofa, holding a crystal glass of my finest bourbon, was William Sterling. He was a man in his late 60s, possessing the distinguished silver-haired elegance of old money and absolute unchecked power. He looked completely at ease in a home he had unlawfully invaded. He took a slow sip of the amber liquid, lowering the glass as his eyes locked onto mine. William smiled. It was a cold, terrifying expression that completely lacked humanity. "Hello, Zuri," William said, his voice smooth, cultured, and dripping with absolute menace. "Please have a seat. We need to talk about my daughter." William Sterling did not belong in my home, but he sat on my custom velvet sofa with the absolute unearned entitlement of a man who believed the entire world was his personal property. The two private military contractors standing by the arched entryway were a pathetic intimidation tactic, a desperate display of physical force from a man losing control of his digital and financial empire. I did not flinch. I did not ask how he bypassed my perimeter security. I simply stood in the center of my living room, projecting an aura of cold, untouchable authority. William took a slow, deliberate sip of my finest bourbon. He swirled the amber liquid in the crystal glass, his eyes locking onto mine with the predatory calmness of an apex predator. "You have caused quite a disruption in my family, Zuri," William said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that completely masked the viciousness of his words. "My daughter is currently sitting in a holding cell, crying her eyes out, because some overzealous local detectives got lucky with a few misunderstood bank transfers. And my son-in-law, the man you were supposed to be building a future with, is facing federal charges. You have made a spectacular mess." I crossed my arms over my chest, my expression entirely devoid of emotion. "They made the mess, William. I am simply the one organizing the cleanup." William chuckled, a dry, patronizing sound that echoed in the quiet room. He set the crystal glass down on the marble coffee table and reached inside his tailored, bespoke suit jacket. He pulled out a crisp white envelope and dropped it onto the table. It landed with a soft, heavy thud. "I appreciate a woman with a ruthless streak," William said, leaning back against the velvet cushions. "It is good for business. But you have fundamentally misunderstood your position on the food chain." You are an operator, Zuri. A very skilled, very aggressive operator. But I am the infrastructure. And you do not go to war with the infrastructure. He tapped the white envelope with his index finger. Inside this envelope is a certified cashier's check made out to your primary holding company. William continued, his tone shifting into a rigid, uncompromising business negotiation. The amount is exactly $10 million. It is entirely clean, fully taxed, and ready to be deposited into any account of your choosing. It is yours free and clear. The absolute second you sign a non-disclosure agreement. Instruct your corporate attorneys to drop the wire fraud charges against Chloe and hand over the primary seed phrases to the cryptocurrency wallet. Your little rogue hacker friend is currently trying to breach. I looked at the envelope, then back up to William's arrogant face. You are offering to buy your daughter's freedom with the exact amount of money you used Tarek to launder through my company. I am offering you a golden parachute. William corrected, his voice hardening into a sharp, condescending edge. Let us be brutally honest for a moment, Zuri. You have built a remarkable little fintech empire, and you love playing the role of the self-made visionary. But you and I both know you never would have made it out of the minor leagues without the initial seed capital my network provided. Tarek was an idiot, yes, but he was a useful idiot who funneled our resources into your hands. You took our money, you built your company on our foundation, and now you are throwing a tantrum because we are finally calling in our investment. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring at me as if I were an uneducated, ungrateful subordinate. You need to take the money and be grateful, Zuri William demanded, his voice dropping into a harsh, commanding growl. You take the check, you hand over the passwords, and you walk away with your company intact. If you refuse, I will use every single connection, every judge, and every federal regulator in my pocket to dismantle Obsidian Holdings brick by brick. I will tie you up in so much litigation, your grandchildren will be paying the legal fees. You are out of your depth. The silence in the room stretched out heavy and suffocating. The two mercenaries at the door shifted their weight, clearly anticipating my surrender. I slowly uncrossed my arms and walked toward the marble coffee table. I picked up the white envelope. The paper was thick, heavy, and expensive. I slid the cashier's check out, my eyes scanning the perfectly printed $10 million figure. It was enough money to secure several lifetimes of absolute luxury. It was the ultimate bribe from a man who believed every single person on Earth had a purchase price. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a heavy silver Zippo lighter. William's confident smirk faltered slightly. I flicked the lighter open. The bright orange flame illuminated the dim living room. I held the edge of the $10 million cashier's check directly into the fire. The thick paper blackened and curled instantly, the flames chewing rapidly through the printed numbers. William lunged forward, his jaw dropping in absolute paralyzed horror as I calmly dropped the burning financial instrument into a heavy crystal ashtray on the table. We both watched in silence as $10 million turned into a worthless pile of gray ash. Are you completely insane? William roared, his face flushing a deep, violent red as he jumped to his feet. You just burned your only way out of this disaster. I am not looking for a way out, William, I stated, my voice echoing with an icy, terrifying calm. I am locking the doors. I pulled my digital tablet from the inside pocket of my blazer and tapped the screen to wake it up. I turned the device around, forcing William to look at the scrolling green code illuminating the glass. While you were busy chartering your private jet and bribing federal judges to keep your daughter out of handcuffs, Maya and I were working. I explained, my tone flat and conversational. You severely underestimated the woman your pawn destroyed. Maya did not just breach the primary firewall of your hidden cryptocurrency wallet. She dismantled the entire secondary authentication node. We bypassed your joint custody protocols exactly 14 minutes ago. William's eyes widened, tracking the numbers on the screen. His chest began to heave with manufactured panic. The $10 million in that wallet is completely gone, William, I announced, watching the realization crush the breath out of his lungs. We drained every single digital cent, but I did not keep it. I refuse to let your dirty money infect my legitimate empire. Maya and I legally transferred the entire balance, routing it through an ironclad, irrevocable trust directly into a philanthropic foundation dedicated to funding Black female software engineers and tech entrepreneurs. Your stolen money is currently financing the next generation of women you tried to suppress. William stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing, without producing a single sound. The arrogant, untouchable billionaire was experiencing catastrophic failure for the first time in his privileged life. But I am not finished. I continued, taking a slow step toward him, forcing him to back away. Maya did not just empty the wallet. She traced the routing numbers back to the physical servers at Wellington Global. She downloaded 15 years of your offshore tax evasion records, your illegal political lobbying receipts, and the encrypted ledgers of every single dirty asset you have ever washed through a proxy investor. William's knees physically buckled. He fell back onto the velvet sofa, his face completely drained of color. 10 minutes before you walked into my home, I sent that entire data packet directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service, I whispered, standing directly over him. I sent copies to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Prosecutor's Office. Your bank accounts are going to be frozen by midnight. Your corporate board is going to strip you of your title by morning. I leaned down, my face inches from his, ensuring he heard every single syllable of his destruction. Your daughter isn't just going to prison, William. She's going to be poor. William Sterling did not utter another word. The powerful, commanding titan of industry completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, broken old man facing total annihilation. He scrambled off the sofa, stumbling past his useless security guards, and fled my home like a rat fleeing a burning building. He abandoned his daughter instantly. By the time the morning news anchors began reporting on the massive, unprecedented federal raid taking place at the Boston headquarters of Wellington Global, William Sterling had already boarded a flight to a non-extradition country, leaving Chloe to face the full, unmitigated wrath of the criminal justice system completely alone. Her high-priced defense attorneys vanished the second her trust fund was frozen. I did not care about William's flight. He was a coward running from an inevitable storm. My focus remained entirely on the parasite who had brought that storm into my home. The harsh, flickering fluorescent lights of the Fulton County Jail visitor room cast a sickly, jaundiced pallor over everything. The air smelled strongly of industrial bleach and deeply ingrained desperation. The heavy steel door on the opposite side of the reinforced glass partition clanked open. Tarek walked into the booth. He wore an oversized, bright orange institutional jumpsuit. His feet shuffled across the scuffed linoleum floor in cheap, laceless canvas slip-ons. The transformation was absolute. The arrogant, impeccably tailored executive who had poisoned my wine and sneered at my dying body was entirely gone. He looked haggard, his skin pale and deeply lined with exhaustion. His hair was unkempt, his shoulders slumped under the crushing weight of his new reality. He sat down on the metal stool, picking up the heavy black telephone receiver with shaking hands. I picked up my receiver, staring at him through the thick, smudged glass. Zuri Tarek gasped, his voice instantly cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Thank God you came. Thank God you are here." He pressed his free hand against the glass, tears immediately spilling over his lower eyelids. It was a performance, a desperate, calculated attempt to manipulate whatever remaining affection he believed I harbored for him. "I am so sorry," Tarek wept, his shoulders shaking as he forced the tears down his cheeks. "I lost my mind, Zuri. I completely lost my mind. The pressure of the company, the stress of the corporate world, it broke me. I felt so small next to you. You were always so brilliant, so successful, so untouchable. I felt completely emasculated by your success. I just wanted to be your equal. I just wanted to feel like I deserved to stand next to you." Chloe and William. They manipulated my insecurities. They poisoned my mind against you. You have to believe me, Zuri. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. I still love you. Please tell your lawyers to back down. Let me come home. We can fix this. We can fix us. I sat perfectly still, my expression a mask of absolute frozen stone. I let him cry. I let him beg. I let him exhaust his entire repertoire of pathetic manufactured remorse. When his sobs finally subsided into heavy, ragged breathing, I leaned forward, bringing my face closer to the glass. "I found Maya," I said, my voice cutting through the static of the telephone line like a surgical scalpel. Tarek stopped breathing. His tear-filled eyes snapped wide open, the manufactured sorrow vanishing instantly, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. "She looks fantastic." I continued, my tone completely flat and conversational. "We had a long, very productive conversation about the intellectual property you stole from her. We spent 48 hours mapping your entire digital existence. You are a terrible coder, Tarek. You left the back door wide open. We bypassed your joint custody protocols. We drained the $10 million crypto wallet. Every single cent of the money you stole, the money you intended to use to build your new life with Chloe, is entirely gone." Tarek's jaw dropped. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. He gripped the telephone receiver so tightly his knuckles turned white. "And William is not coming to save you," I added, watching the final pillars of his hope crumble into dust. "I sent his offshore tax ledgers to the IRS. He fled the country this morning. He abandoned his company, he abandoned his assets, and he abandoned his daughter. Chloe is currently sitting in a cell 3 floors above you, screaming at public defenders because her trust fund no longer exists. You have no money. You have no allies. You have no future." The mask of the weeping, remorseful husband shattered completely. The fragile, pathetic victim routine evaporated, revealing the snarling, vicious predator underneath. Tarek slammed his fist against the reinforced glass, his face contorting into a mask of pure, feral rage. "You think you have won!" Tarek hissed, his voice vibrating with absolute venom, his teeth bared like a trapped animal. "You think you can take everything from me and just walk away? Dion is still out there. He has the logistics fleet. He has the infrastructure. We will rebuild. We will reorganize. Dion will come for you, Zuri. We will tear your entire empire to the ground. You are dead. Do you hear me? You are dead." I slowly stood up from the metal stool. I smoothed the front of my immaculate tailored crimson blazer. I looked down at the screaming feral man trapped inside a concrete cage. A slow, razor-sharp smirk spread across my face. "Dion cannot do anything, Tarek," I said, my voice ringing with absolute, uncompromising triumph. "I bought the holding company that owns his commercial fleet this morning. I absorbed all of his outstanding debt. I own his trucks. I own his dispatch centers. Dion works for me now." I placed the telephone receiver back onto its metal cradle, cutting off the sound of Tarek screaming my name. And he's fired. 6 months evaporated into the grueling, uncompromising machinery of the federal justice system. The heavy, reinforced oak doors of the United States District Court swung shut behind me, sealing off the frantic chatter of the press corps swarming the marble corridors outside. The air inside the courtroom was stifling thick with the smell of polished wood, nervous sweat, and impending doom. I took my seat in the center of the front row of the gallery, smoothing the skirt of my immaculate tailored ivory suit. Roxanne sat to my right, her posture rigid, a thick leather portfolio resting on her lap. Maya sat to my left, wearing a sharp navy blazer, her posture exuding a quiet, profound confidence that had been absent the day I found her in that greasy diner. We were not here to testify. The trial had already concluded. The mountain of digital evidence Maya and Roxanne had extracted from the Vance family's shattered network had been utterly insurmountable. We were simply here for the execution. The heavy side door near the judge's bench clicked open, and the low murmur of the packed gallery instantly died. 2 armed federal marshals stepped into the room, followed immediately by Tarek and Chloe. I stared at the man I had once pledged my life to, feeling absolutely nothing. The physical degradation of 6 months in a county lockup without access to his wealth, his bespoke tailors, or his expensive grooming routines was staggering. Tarek wore an oversized, violently bright orange jumpsuit that hung off his diminishing frame. His face was gaunt, his cheekbones jutting out sharply beneath pale, sallow skin. His hair was cropped short, exposing the receding hairline he had spent thousands trying to hide. He shuffled toward the defense table, his wrists bound in heavy steel chains secured to a leather belly chain. He did not look like a mastermind. He looked like a cornered, exhausted rat. Chloe followed him, and her transformation was arguably worse. The arrogant, untouchable heiress who had smirked at me across my own mahogany boardroom table was completely unrecognizable. Her blonde hair was matted and pulled back into a severe, harsh braid. Her skin lacked the glowing perfection of endless spa treatments, appearing dull and deeply lined with the stress of abandonment. When William Sterling fled the country and liquidated her trust fund, he took her entire identity with him. She sank into her wooden chair, her shoulders curling inward, refusing to make eye contact with a single person in the room. From the back row of the gallery, a sudden harsh scraping of wood against marble shattered the silence. I did not turn my head, but I could hear the frantic, ragged breathing of Geraldine Vance. She had somehow managed to sneak into the back of the courtroom despite the massive media presence. The woman who had once defined herself by country club memberships and imported silk was currently wearing a faded, wrinkled trench coat over a mismatched blouse. Her eviction had been absolute, and the subsequent freezing of Tarek's assets had left her entirely destitute. She had been living in a cheap extended stay motel on the outskirts of the city, relying on the vanishing goodwill of former acquaintances who increasingly refused to return her calls. "You ruined us!" Geraldine shrieked, her voice cracking wildly as she pointed a shaking arthritic finger at the back of my head. "You stole my son. You took my home. You are a monster, Zuri. You planned this entire thing just to destroy our family." The two bailiffs stationed at the rear doors moved with terrifying speed. They grabbed Geraldine by the elbows, lifting her entirely off her feet as she thrashed and kicked against their grip. "Let me go." Geraldine sobbed, her voice echoing shrilly across the high vaulted ceiling. "He is my son. You cannot take him away from me. He was just trying to secure his future." "Order in this court," the judge boomed, striking his heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block with a crack like a rifle shot. "Remove that woman from this courtroom immediately. If she utters one more syllable, I will hold her in criminal contempt, and she can join the defendants in the holding cells downstairs." Geraldine's weeping faded into a muffled, pathetic whimper as the heavy oak doors slammed shut behind her, cutting her off from her golden child forever. Tarek squeezed his eyes shut, a single tear cutting a path through the grime on his cheek. He knew exactly what that sound meant. He was entirely alone. The judge, a stern man with decades of experience dismantling white-collar criminals, adjusted his reading glasses and stared down from the high bench. His gaze swept over Tarek and Chloe, utterly devoid of sympathy. "I have presided over this court for 22 years, the judge began, his voice resonating with cold, absolute authority. "I have seen crimes of passion, crimes of desperation, and crimes of sheer ignorance. But the conspiracy presented in this courtroom represents a level of calculated parasitic greed that is truly breathtaking." He looked directly at Chloe, who shrank further into her orange jumpsuit. "Chloe Vance, you utilized your position of privilege to orchestrate a sophisticated wire fraud scheme designed to strip a woman of her legally earned assets while she lay incapacitated in a hospital bed. You acted with malice, arrogance, and a profound belief that your wealth insulated you from the consequences of the law. You are hereby sentenced to 5 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole." Chloe let out a strangled, breathless gasp. Her head fell forward, her face burying into her chained hands as she began to hyperventilate. The judge did not pause. He turned his piercing gaze to Tarek. "Tarek Vance," the judge continued, his voice dropping into a harsh, unforgiving register. "You engaged in a systematic multi-year campaign of financial manipulation, intellectual property theft, and ultimate betrayal. You did not just attempt to steal your wife's company, you laced her wine with unprescribed narcotics with the explicit documented intent of inducing a catastrophic medical event. You weaponized your marriage to execute a hostile takeover. You are a danger to society, hiding behind the facade of a legitimate businessman." For the charges of attempted murder, aggravated assault, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. Tarek's knees buckled beneath the table. He let out a low, guttural moan, his head dropping onto the defense table. 15 years. His youth, his ambition, his entire remaining viable life had just been erased by a single strike of a gavel. But I am not finished, the judge stated, raising a stack of financial documents. I leaned forward slightly, anticipating the final lethal blow we had spent months coordinating with the federal prosecutors. The financial damage inflicted upon the victim Zuri Vance and the secondary victim Maya Linwood requires permanent, uncompromising restitution, the judge announced. I am issuing an absolute lifetime garnishment order against both defendants. Upon your eventual release from federal custody, any future wages, inheritances, or liquid assets acquired by Tarek or Chloe Vance will be automatically seized and redirected to the victims until the sum of $25 million in punitive damages and legal fees is satisfied in full. The courtroom gasped collectively. The judge had just ensured that even if they survived prison, they would never under any circumstances be allowed to build wealth again. They were permanently, legally, and irreversibly bankrupted. They would spend the rest of their natural lives working minimum wage jobs just to pay me back for the privilege of trying to kill me. Court is adjourned, the judge declared, striking the gavel one final time. The federal marshals grabbed Tarek and Chloe by the shoulders, hauling them roughly to their feet. Tarek twisted his head, his eyes locking onto mine as they dragged him toward the heavy side door leading to the holding cells. His expression was a mixture of pure terror and profound regret. He opened his mouth desperately, trying to say something, trying to offer one last pathetic plea for forgiveness. I did not wait to hear it. I stood up, smoothed the lapels of my ivory jacket, and turned my back on him. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor, completely ignoring the reporters shouting my name. I pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the blinding, brilliant Georgia sunlight. Exactly 1 year later, the sprawling Buckhead estate was completely transformed. The heavy, oppressive silence that had once defined my marriage to Tarek was entirely gone, replaced by the rich, vibrant sounds of genuine laughter and the deep, soulful rhythm of a jazz vinyl spinning on a vintage record player. The air was thick with the scent of roasted turkey sage and heavily spiced apple cider. I stood at the head of the massive dining room table, watching the beautiful, chaotic harmony of my chosen family. Maya sat near the center of the table, her face glowing with genuine happiness. She was no longer the exhausted, defeated woman hiding in a diner. As the chief technology officer of Obsidian Holdings, she commanded a department of 200 engineers and had recently launched our new algorithmic security protocol to global acclaim. She was currently locked in a passionate, highly technical debate with Roxanne about the integration of decentralized ledgers. Roxanne sat beside her, sipping a glass of bourbon, occasionally interjecting with her signature dry sarcasm that made Maya laugh until she clutched her sides. Surrounding them were the loyal friends, the fierce mentors, and the dedicated colleagues who had stood by me when the walls were closing in. They were the people who had not flinched when the media descended, the people who had offered their couches, their expertise, and their unwavering loyalty when I was fighting for my life. There was no toxic family sitting at this table. There were no hidden agendas, no gaslighting, no fake performative smiles masking deep-seated resentment. Every single person in this room wanted me to win, and I wanted the exact same for them. I rested my fingertips against the polished mahogany wood of the table, letting the warmth of the room wash over me. I allowed myself a rare moment of deep internal reflection. I thought about the terrifying night I woke up in the intensive care unit, paralyzed, fighting to breathe, realizing the man holding my hand was actively trying to stop my heart. I thought about the sheer suffocating terror of knowing my own home was a trap. But I did not let the terror break me. I weaponized it. I took the poison Tarek tried to feed me and I forced him to swallow it. I dismantled his mother's parasitic lifestyle. I crushed his brother's logistical fleet. I sent his wealthy sister-in-law to a concrete cell, and I forced his proxy billionaire father into permanent terrified exile. I did not just survive the Vance family, I consumed them. I absorbed their resources, redistributed their stolen wealth, and leveled up my empire into something completely untouchable. A sudden hush fell over the dining room as my guests noticed me standing quietly at the head of the table. Maya smiled, raising her glass slightly in anticipation. Roxanne leaned back in her chair, a look of profound respect crossing her features. I reached forward and picked up a heavy crystal goblet filled with an incredibly expensive vintage red wine. The deep crimson liquid swirled gently against the glass. For a fraction of a second, the ghost of that anniversary dinner flashed in my mind. The memory of the bitter chemical taste of the muscle relaxants Tarek had crushed into my drink threatened to surface. I crushed the memory, instantly burying it beneath a mountain of absolute triumph. I raised the glass high, looking into the eyes of every single person who had helped me build this new reality. To family, I said, my voice ringing clear, steady, and vibrating with absolute power. The one you build, not the one you bleed for. I brought the crystal rim to my lips and took a long, confident sip. The wine was flawless. I was thriving, untethered, and in absolute control of my empire. The story teaches us that true power does not lie in inheriting wealth or manipulating others, but in the relentless pursuit of one's own capabilities and establishing ironclad boundaries. Zuri's journey from a victim of a devastating familial and romantic betrayal to an untouchable titan of industry illustrates that toxic relationships, regardless of blood or marriage, must be surgically removed to allow for genuine growth. True family is not defined by shared DNA or legal certificates, but by unwavering loyalty, mutual respect, and the shared commitment to seeing each other thrive without conditions or parasitic intentions. If you found Zuri's journey of ruthless empowerment inspiring, hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories of ultimate vindication.